Welcome, Bronco Nation, to another exciting video. This is the last part of my discussion of 2022. I'm going to do three videos. First one off starting today, where we're going to look at the offense, the defense, the special teams. I have special guests coming on to talk about each of those positions, position groups or focuses there. We got Ron Counts on today to talk about the offense. The next guest is going to be BJ Rains talking about the defense. And then we're going to wrap it all up talking about special teams with Tyler Rousa. But today we're going to talk about the Boise State 2022 offense. We're going to talk about just overall highlights of what happened this year, some top storylines. We'll talk about some top players. We'll talk about the new offensive coordinator for Boise State. Of course, there were a lot of different offensive coordinator storylines during the season itself, but the new offensive coordinator, Bush Hamden, for Boise State. And then we'll wrap up with just a quick look at the recruiting class and who we might think makes an impact next season. These videos are all going to be between 30 and 45 minutes, so a little bit shorter than what I usually do for these wrap-ups, but I think this will be better to have a little bit more of a focused look and also to kind of move us on to 2023 as quickly as possible. Once I complete these three videos, all my videos will be talking about 2023 and beyond. So let's get into this wrap-up and a quick look back at what was a great season for Boise State, especially considering the way that it started. It definitely ended much better, and I think fans are very excited for the future. But before we begin talking about that, let me introduce a man who shouldn't need much introduction, but it's Ron Counts here from the Idaho Statesman. You can also find him on Twitter at Ron_Bronco Beat. He is a prolific writer. I mean, when you look up Wikipedia definition of prolific, you've got Ron Counts right there. Anytime there's a major Boise State storyline, or even something that you might not consider major, he will write something about it, and he will get you invested and interested in whatever is happening about Boise State sports. You definitely need to make sure that you look him up. Make sure that you follow Idaho Statesman so you can catch up on all of his great content. But we're so excited to have someone of Ron Counts' stature on the channel today. He's come on a couple times before, and we're excited to talk some Boise State football. Thanks for coming on, Ron.
Man, it's always a pleasure to come on. Always a pleasure to talk to you, Jacob. Thank you so much for that glowing that glowing invitation. I mean, you were way too kind there. You're doing a great work here on this channel. I love the stuff that you're doing. So thank you for having us on, and keep up the hard work.
Well, thanks so much for coming on today, Ron. We'll just get right into the Boise State offense at a glance here. We'll just go through some statistics, and then we'll talk about some of these storylines together. So looking at Boise State's 2022 offense at a glance, first off, they were 391.8 yards per game. So total offense overall wasn't shabby, 57th in the FBS. The big focus for Boise State, especially the second half of the season, was that rushing game, 202.2 yards rushing per game. Gave them top 20 in the FBS, 17th overall. They had 300-plus yard games. I've looked through all of the seasons that I can find stats on in the FBS. I believe this is the first time they've ever had 300-yard rushing games in a season. They also were fifth most among non-option G5 teams for rushing yard average this season. The place where they kind of teetered off a little bit, definitely not the statistics you usually expect out of a Boise State team, which tends to be a little bit more pass-focused, was the passing game. 189.5 yards passing per game, gave them 108 overall in the FBS this year. Total yards, 2,668 yards passing and 2,749 yards rushing, 47 offensive touchdowns. There were some big storylines this year. This was an exciting year to cover Boise State sports, as you well know. Tim Plow was let go. He was replaced by Dirk Cutter, former Boise State head coach, former NFL head coach. I mean, at that point, you had an offensive coordinator at the college football level that I think had more wealth of experience than any other offensive coordinator in the FBS. I mean, can you name one other NFL head coach who is serving, a recent NFL head coach who's serving as an offensive coordinator? So he definitely very experienced, definitely great for him to give up his time and his energy there for his son and his son's friends, as he said. That was fantastic. Boise State definitely finishing the season a good way. And then, of course, part of all that, Bachmeier transfers out, replaced by the freshman Taylon Green. And that was an exciting journey for Boise State fans. They got to take a look at the future there. What jumps out to you the most, or what surprised you the most about this season when you kind of look at all these stats, all these storylines, everything that happened this year?
That was a great synopsis. But you know, I think the thing that we have to admit here about this season is that this offense hit rock bottom early in the year. Through the first 4 games of the year, they were barely scratching out 120 rushing yards a game. The passing game was a mess because the quarterbacks had no time. The receivers got no separation. But after that UTEP loss, and let's talk about that UTEP loss because no one saw it coming. You got a team that's a 15 or 16 point underdog. You know, everybody put money on Boise State in that game. Everybody lost money there. And as you mentioned, it cost Tim Plow his job. It kind of prompted what was maybe Hank Bachmeier already thinking about transferring. And what a turnaround that brought around. You asked me what I'm most surprised about. I mean, what a storybook season. I know everything didn't end the way everyone wanted it to, but what a turnaround. You know, most teams that are 2-2 and lose their coordinator, that team could implode. Everyone's going to pack it in and start thinking about next season. Not this program. Andy Avalos rallied the troops. Dirk Cutter threw on that cape and came in and saved the day. And you talked about his experience. That showed so many ways. It takes a truly confident, experienced coach to admit that he ran the same 5 plays for a whole half against San Diego State. I mean, Dirk Cutter specializes in getting the most out of his players, and that's what he did with this offense. You know, he worked with the same offensive line that Tim Plow worked with, the same receivers, the same running backs, and he just found ways to get an inch more, 1/10 of an effort more out of those guys, and it paid off huge for them. And just imagine if Dirk Cutter hadn't been here. Imagine if they fired Tim Plow and had to, say, promote Matt Miller or someone to offensive coordinator. That's no slight to Matt Miller, but he's not any more qualified to be an OC than Tim Plow was. In reality, if you look at it, he came from an FCS program just like Tim Plow. So if Dirk Cutter hadn't been here to save the day, this season could have been a complete wash. And instead, you talked about those passing yards. They go from barely 120 rushing yards a game to almost to 200 rushing yards a game, right? The passing game in the span of 2 months grew just leaps and bounds. Taylor Green looked very, very comfortable in the pocket. So I was really shocked by that growth.
Well, you talked a little bit about Tim Plow and his struggles. You know, what do you think led to him having, of course, to be terminated there, or his struggles at Boise State? You know, do you think that it was the transition from FCS to FBS? Do you think that it was maybe not having the players for the system he wanted to run? Was it maybe the disconnect with Andy Avalos, where Tim Plow a little bit more of an air raid style guy, Andy Avalos, of course, wanting to focus a little bit more on that running game? Or do you think it was something else, or a combination of all of the above? What do you think kind of factored into that?
Yeah, I would say D, all the above there. I mean, in a way, it was stubbornness on Tim Plow's part, because when you get to a certain level, you've got to understand that you can't force your scheme on players. You got to adapt your scheme to the players you have. And I just don't think Tim Plow did that. And Tim was also very open when he got this job about how much he puts on his players, especially the quarterbacks. He says he trains them like NFL players. He admitted it's a very complicated scheme, and maybe it was just too complicated, because as we saw, Dirk Cutter came in, he simplified things worked better. Obviously, when you have a next level athlete like Taylor Green, that hides a lot of blemishes, that makes up for a lot of mistakes. But Dirk Cutter simplified this playbook. He took so much off the quarterback's plate, he put it on the coach's plate, and this team just performed better. So I think it goes back to experience. You know, Tim Plow's going to learn from this experience. He's going to learn that, maybe you were a genius at the FCS level. Maybe you do have an awesome system, but if you don't have the guys to fit that system, you got to adjust that system. So, everyone grows, players, coaches, professionals, lawyers, people in the military. You grow and you learn your profession. That's what Tim Plow is doing right now. And by the way, congrats to Tim Plow, who landed at Cal and is now coaching the tight ends there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I hope that both Tim Plow and Bachmeier find success in the next beyond wherever they go to. I mean, a lot of fans, I think they took out their frustration on what was going on with the season and kind of put it onto Bachmeier and Plow. I mean, you had the UT Martin game where fans were literally cheering when Bachmeier had to leave the field because of an injury, and the team didn't like that. So I think there was for so long so much negativity swirling around both of those individuals. I see it on Twitter a lot where it's kind of continued after they've left. And I don't like that. I don't like the fact you see anybody leaves your school to go somewhere else, you want them to have success because it reflects well on you. If the only place that they had success or could potentially perform was at Boise State, I mean, that doesn't speak well for Boise State. We need to be a school that develops players and coaches that can succeed at any level. So I'm hoping all the best for both these individuals. I definitely think that it wasn't a lack of effort on either of their parts. I think that, like you said, a lot of factors. I do think it's D, all of the above. But at the end of the day, I think you've got to find the place that you fit right. As an offensive coordinator, you've got to find the place where you mesh well with the head coach's vision. As a player, you've got to find the system that you mesh well with your skills, what you bring to the table. So I think both of them will have success at the next level, wherever they end up going to. But I do think that, like you said, Boise State hit rock bottom. How many teams start off with the way that Boise State happened with a loss to UTEP, and then end up with 10 wins in the Mountain West Championship and winning their bowl game there at the end of the season. I mean, it was a miraculous turnaround. Now, you talked about Dirk Cutter being a big factor as part of that. I also felt like there was a change in energy in the fan base and in the players when he came in. Obviously, you had 2009 season where you had the 2% better. That was the motto, just trying to get a little bit better every day. Can you talk to a little bit about that shift in energy and focus when Dirk Cutter came in?
Absolutely. And I think Dirk has learned over the years how to ingratiate himself to the players. Obviously he's coached at every level. He's coached some amazing athletes, so he knows how to do that. But I want to kind of go back here for a second. Hank does get a bit of a bad rap, and it's understandable. The results weren't there. This is a result-oriented business. But Hank came in with huge expectations, highest ranked recruit in program history, 4-star guy, and he just got no help. He had no consistency around him. 3 different offensive coordinators during his career, so many injuries. So I just think he really got a bad rap. And when you talk about that change in energy, I think a lot of that is winning. Winning cures a lot of ills. You come out there, you put some W's on the board, and it makes a lot of those owies and those bruises and bumps go away. So I just think winning is what changed that locker room. But you got to put a lot on Taylor Green. This is a young man who, 2 years ago was in high school, and he came in and thrust into a leadership role, and he handled it like a true professional. I mean, everything he said, everything he did, the players loved him. The players worked hard for him. They played hard for him. They knew that he would go out there. I mean, think about that tackle that he made in the bowl game. I mean, such a huge play there. That showed what kind of blue-collar guy he is and how he'll put his body on the line for his teammates. He's not a prima donna quarterback that just needs all the glory and all the stats. He's going to go out there and work for these guys. So yeah, Dirk Cutter coming in and ingratiating himself to the program helped. Winning helped, but I think a lot of the credit goes to Taylor Green. He played and he led beyond his years.
Well, I love that you bring up Taylor Green there, because that transitioned us perfectly into discussion of the top players from the season, some of the statistics there. So obviously just lead off with Taylor Green. 2,042 yards passing, 14 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, 586 yards rushing, so over 2,000 yards passing and over 500 yards on the ground. He had a long of 91 yards rushing, and he added 10 touchdowns on the ground, so 24 touchdowns total that he was responsible for this season. Definitely a spark, definitely energy, but I also think that we found and saw George Holani come into his own this season, a player who's dealt with a lot of injuries since his freshman year, or since just after his freshman year, they're coming into the 2020 season. But he has, I don't think, seen 100% yet. And he came into this year, and about mid-season, he hit his stride. 1,157 yards rushing, 5.2 yard average per carry, 10 total touchdowns. He also added 3 touchdowns, 150 yards receiving on the ground. And then another young player, Ashton Jeanty, exploded. I mean, you got to talk about all these guys, and you talk about a change in mindset, energy. I felt like it wasn't just a change in the offensive system. I think Dirk Cutter got more out of these individuals. I thought they put more on the plate. Like, these seemed to be fighting for more than just going out in the game. They were fighting for this culture and for this family. Jeanty exploding 821 yards rushing as a true freshman. I mean, that kid is special. Definitely future NFL talent. I think he reminds me a lot of Doug Martin. 5.3 yard average per carry, 7 touchdowns. And then the wide receiver game wasn't necessarily the focus, but you did see some guys step up that maybe weren't going to be your number one guy right off the bat. You would have thought coming into the season. I think a lot of people thought Stephon Cobbs was going to be a big contributor. At the end of the year there, he dealt with a little bit of injury, but even early on, he wasn't necessarily the player that people thought he was going to be. 396 yards receiving, 2 touchdowns. But you definitely saw some other wide receivers stepping up. Latrell Caples led the team, almost 600 yards, 549 yards receiving, 10.8 yard average per carry, 4 touchdowns. Billy Bowen stepped up in a big way. I know we talked about all these players when we were talking about Khalil Shakir and the draft, and we talked about who might be that next step up for wide receiver. I know you were talking a lot about Billy Bowens for sure, and I was really excited about Latrell Caples. So it was exciting to see both of these guys step up and have a big season. And then Eric McAllister, coming on late in the season. And that's another true freshman there who, as part of that Jeanty Green, freshman influence on this team. I'm excited for his future. 259 yards receiving on his end, 23.5 yard average, definitely a deep threat and 4 touchdowns. Who surprised you the most out of, not necessarily the group that I named, but out of the offense overall here? Who kind of surprised you or stepped up the most in your view? I mean, you already talked about obviously, but
absolutely. I got to say, Ashton Jeanty is just a star in the making, as you mentioned. I mean, you look at that backfield with Holani, Jeanty, and Green. That is a 3-headed monster. It's going to give a lot of defensive nightmares. I mean, so much athleticism. Taylor Green is just such a next level athlete. He's so athletic that he makes everything look easy. He's got a long stride, makes him look like he's jogging out there. Kalani's another next level guy. He's got the size, he's got the vision, he's got the power. I mean, if I'm being honest, I'm really shocked that Kalani's coming back this year. To me, it's more risk than reward on his part because you got a lot more people eating up carries this year. Taylor Green is going to get carries. Ashton Jeanty's going to get carries. Elion Noah could get some carries. So, George Kalani might only get 15 or 20 carries a game this year. So maybe he can't really help his draft stock that much. The only way him coming back makes sense is if someone convinced him that he was going to be an undrafted free agent this year and that maybe he can work his way into the rounds of the draft. So maybe that makes sense. But I mean, what a huge benefit is to this team to have those three guys back next year. Kalani's powerful and shifty. Green is just next level fast. We saw him at 91-yard touchdown run. And Jeanty just does not look like a freshman. He's chiseled. He's jacked. He runs powerful. He can run around guys, but he can drop his shoulder and run through guys. I mean, I think the sky's the limit for that young man. And I mentioned Elion Noah. You look at what he did with a very limited workload this year. He's what I see in him as an ideal third down back. He's shifty. He's explosive. He catches the ball well out of the backfield. He's really good at putting his foot in the ground and getting upfield and getting those, a couple, 2, 3, 4 yards, whatever you need. So I think he could get some carries. So I think this running game is just set for the future. And you talked about that receiving game. The real question that still remains with the receivers is who's the number one. Caples and Cobbs are basically the same guy. They're shifty, speedy guys that are kind of built for the slot but can play on the outside some. Bowens is an interesting guy. He's not going to blow by too many guys, but he's got a big body, long arms. We did see him stretch defenses some this year. We don't know if he's coming back in or not. He'd have to be a super senior if he does. And then you mentioned McAllister. He is such the sky's the limit for him as well. I mean, probably the most talented deep threat on this roster. How about this? He only caught 11 passes this year, but he averaged 23.5 yards per catch, tied for the team lead with 4 touchdowns. I mean, the kid is a deep ball threat from the get-go. He's 6'3", he's 200 plus. He knows how to use his body. He's going to be good moving forward. So the great thing is we know that Cobbs, Campbell's, and McAllister are definitely coming back next year. We know Austin Bolt's coming back off injury. I think Zamondre Merriweather is going to be a really good receiver on the outside. I think Prince Strakum's going to be a good receiver on the outside. So there's some young talent coming, but we still need to see that one true number one Khalil Shakir type receiver emerge out of that group.
Do you think that, obviously coming in as a freshman this year, and so I think the deep ball became more of his focus as you tend to see with freshmen, but do you think that with a full offseason of work, from what you saw this year, do you think McAllister has the potential to be that? He's not just a slot guy. He can run the deep stuff as well, obviously. And I think we saw in the bowl game, he has some shiftiness when he catches those shorter passes and makes the moves. Do you think that he can be an all-around wide receiver? Does he have a potential to become that number one guy? Or kind of a Geraldo Boldevine figure where he's pretty much just out there to throw the deep ball to him?
No, I definitely do. We saw his ability to stretch defenses and to win 50-50 balls this year. And you think about it, he's only a redshirt freshman. He's already 6'3", 210-ish. He's only going to get bigger and stronger. His routes are only going to get more crisp. So he's going to learn how to use his body better. He's going to learn how to, win those possession battle passes. And we already know he's a deep threat. So yeah, I think if we had to, throw the dice out there right now and say who is their number one heading into 2023, I think it's Eric McAllister moving forward. I think he's the guy that can be the next star here. That being said, Prince Straken's got those same attributes. Zamondre Merriweather has those same attributes. These guys are big-bodied receivers. They know how to stretch the field. They know how to go up and pluck that ball out of the air, and they know how to win it at the highest point in the air. So I think the future is really bright for that receiver room.
I definitely think there's a lot of hidden depth and talent on this roster that we haven't even seen yet for sure. And then the guys that are coming back, let's talk about some of those guys that are coming back. So we had some exciting players that you thought might be gone, deciding to come back to Boise State. And I think that shows an investment in this future for Boise State, a buy-in to the new offensive coordinator, who we'll talk about here in a second, and a buy-in to where this program is going. But like you said, Kalani coming back, Riley Smith comes back at tight end. I don't know if he was as big a surprise as Kalani, but I think some people might have thought that he was moving on. So both of those players decided to come back and invest in this team. Besides just the quality of play that they bring on the field, what does it speak to have leaders like that coming back and investing in the team when they could have chosen to hit, the portal or chosen to hit and go on to the next level? What does that speak to the chemistry of the team and what they bring?
Oh, it's huge. And Andy Avalo said it. That's what sparked this turnaround. That's what kept this team from imploding when it was 2-2 after that loss to UTEP. You've got to have those veteran leaders because a coach can only do so much. Think about when you were a teacher. You could be the best teacher in the world, but at some point, they're still just an old, stuffy teacher, But if you have one of your peers standing next to you and acting like a leader and acting like a mature, young man, that's going to hit home more. That's going to resonate more in the locker room. And that's huge. And you talked about those guys coming back. It's not just Helani and Smith. Steph Cobbs is back next year. Cade Beresford, we know, is coming back next year. I would imagine Garrett Curran is going to be coming back next year. So, they're going to have a good group of super seniors. And that's huge, 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 especially when you look at the leaders, the leaders of this team right now are all redshirt freshmen, redshirt sophomores like Taylor Green, Ashton Jeanty. You need those core guys in the locker room to kind of keep those guys together, keep everything flowing smooth.
Now, one last question before we move on to talking about the offensive coordinator and a real quick look at this recruiting class. So kind of a look forward. One last question, kind of talking about that running game, because you mentioned it yourself, those split carries that are probably going to be happening there. We saw it this season in quite a few of the games there. And then, of course, when you can't ignore a player of the talent level that Ashton Jeanty is on your roster, what do you think that backfield is going to look like? Do you I think a lot of fans, when they heard that Helani was coming back, there was some mixed reactions, because I think there was a lot of excitement on what he brings to the table. Obviously, I think that he is an all-time great back at Boise State, not just because he hasn't necessarily put up the statistics, because a lot of times he's been injured, but he's been one of those unique backs at Boise State. I like to look back at Boise State's past and find players that I compare to current players or future players. And Helani, for me, he doesn't really fit the mold of any former Boise State back. He's not a big, speedy power back like Jay Ajayi. He's not, kind of that more Jack Musley cutter like Doug Martin. And he's not even kind of that unique hybrid like Ian Johnson was. I think he brings a new level to this field and just not just his ability to make moves in space, but also fight through tackles. He's not really that big of a guy. So Helani obviously brings a lot to the table, but some fans seem to be a little bit upset in some ways because I think they were excited to see the Ashton Jeanty show and what he could do with a bulk or majority of the carries. So how do you think this backfield looks this season with two all-time great potential backs there for Boise State? This is incredible having both these guys. I don't think we've had players of this level on the same field together since we had Ian Johnson, Doug Martin, and Harper all on the same roster at one time. So what do you think this run game is going to look like? Do you potentially see Jeanty taking a little bit more of that starting role and Helani being a little bit more of a supporter? How do you think this is going to mesh and work out this year?
So for one, fans should be really, really, really excited that Helani is back because as we've seen in college football these days, you can't make it with one back. So if you've got two great backs, your chances are greatly improved to not just win, but go deep into the playoffs and have a really, really great season. And George Helani is one of those guys that you can just tell every time he touches the ball, you can tell he's a special player. Whether he makes two guys miss or he runs through a guy or he fits through a gap that's an inch wide, he just knows how to do it. It's just an innate skill that he has. He knows how to play this game. So, George Helani is a guy who's got to get a bare minimum of 15 touches a game. In reality, I think he's a guy that needs 20 touches a game. But then you touched on it. Ashton Jeanty is a guy that's going to demand some carries. I think going into this year, you got to expect him to get 10 carries a game. The way he ran as a true freshman, he's only going to get bigger and stronger and faster. I think he gets at least 10 carries a game. And then you got to factor in Taylor Green, who's going to take another 5 or 10 carries himself. So you're already at 30 to 35 carries. So maybe you have another 5 carries to split between Elion Noah, Tyler Crow, and another young man who we haven't mentioned yet, our incoming freshman, John Braze Dubar, who in reality, if anyone that should be upset about Helani coming back, it's him, because he had a chance to come in and be the number 2 back right away, and now he's going to be third on the depth chart and maybe get a couple carries a game. But still, going into this year with 2 potentially all-conference backs, which I'm not sure has ever happened in the history of the Mountain West, having that on your roster, it's huge. It makes them the favorite in the Mountain West right away. It helps so much with what's going to be a revolving door on the offensive line, and it gives Taylor Green so much comfort. It's almost like a safety valve for Taylor Green. He doesn't have to do all the work. He doesn't have to put the team on his shoulders. George Helani and Ashton Jeanty can do it for him.
Well, I think that you touched on something important there, and it's the fact that you have so much talent and wealth on this roster, especially from offensive perspective. You have Jeanty, Green, and Helani all in the backfield for you, and then a wealth of hidden talent in the wide receiver room. You're kind of in a perfect place for a new offensive coordinator to take over here. I mean, you're not leaving cupboards bare. You have a lot of potential to build on the excitement. So let's talk about that new offensive coordinator here, Bush Hamden. He's got a lot of things that he's going to have to work with and kind of develop his own system here for Boise State. But at the same time, he's being given a wealth of talent that he can come in with some confidence. What are your thoughts, just kind of initial thoughts here on this hire for Boise State?
Well, in my mind, they hit home run with this hire already. I mean, Bush is a guy who I mentioned early on when Plow got fired as a possible candidate, only because of his connection to Boise State. He was a candidate for when Plow got hired. He had an interview then, didn't get the job then, but he's a former Boise State player, was here as a backup quarterback. And you look at his resume, it's incredibly impressive. Stops at Florida, Washington, Missouri, in the NFL with the Falcons. He's learned so much at all those stops. He's earned this role. And then, how about this? Look at the list of BSU royalty he's worked for. He worked for Chris Peterson at Washington, Brian Harsin at Arkansas State, Elijah Drinkwitz at Missouri. I mean, he's worked under these guys. He's perfected his craft. He's ready to take this step. And as you said, he's got pieces in place. He knows plenty about Taylor Green already. He knows that running game is special. So he knows what he's got to do. He knows his job is easier because that running game is special. And he's going to lean on that running game a lot. And not only that, he also has a prior relationship with incoming freshman quarterback CJ Tiller. He recruited him out of high school. He was actually trying to get him to flip from Boise State to Missouri when he was at Missouri. So he knows him quite well. So I think Bush is in a really good spot to come in here and have success in year one.
Well, he definitely was somebody that was on my radar. I'll be honest, he wasn't the number one guy that I was looking at when I did the video with Master Football talking about who might be those potential replacements for Boise State. I think I had number one, I had Mike Samford. I thought it would be cool to bring back with the offensive style that he ran, the success he had. I was excited about Kirby Moore potentially, more because of the last name than necessarily what he's brought so far. But my third guy overall, at least from my realistic picks, was Bush Hamden. And when I talk about experience and also potential to keep long term, he was actually my favorite for those categories. When you talk about loyalty to the program and the experience that he brings, he was definitely somebody that was on my radar. And I think that he can come in here and have success right off the bat. Unlike Tim Plow, he's taking over with a lot of differences. He's had experience at this level. He's coming in, what I think, is a stronger roster, at least in that running game for sure, for Boise State. And I think that he is probably going to be a little bit more on the same mindset with Andy Avalos. Do you see him coming in and having success right off the bat, or do you think we have a little bit of a development year, kind of a little bit of a break-in year before we see something in 2024?
There's always a bit of a learning curve. He's not going to come in and run the same system that Tim Plow or Dirk Cutter did. He's going to run his own system. So it's early to say if he's going to have a lot of success. But when you talk about making him a realistic candidate, Jeremiah Dickey deserves a lot of the credit for that, because he went out and found the money to pay this man Power 5 money. You look at what Tim Plow was making here. He was making $280,000 a year. Bush Hamden comes in making $400,000 a year. He'll be making $420,000 next year. I mean, he's the highest paid assistant coach in Boise State history. And Jeremiah Dickey has done that through fundraising, through channeling resources, through in some ways just making the athletic department run like a well-oiled machine. He's brought in $9 million donations since December 2020. I mean, that's going to make a difference, and we're already seeing it. We already saw Spencer Danielson get a raise. He's up to $400,000 now a year as well. So you've got to do that to keep your good coaches here. That's always been the knock on Boise State. You guys get a good coach, and then he gets recognized by the Power 5, and he's gone because they can double his salary. Now that you can compete financially, now you can really start doing some stuff. Now you can really start doing some damage and going into every year realistically as a top 25 candidate, as a potential candidate for the expanded playoff. That makes it a reality.
Well, looking forward at that future, this will be the last part of our video. And I actually don't know how long we've gone so far because I forgot to start a timer, but it's totally fine. Spend as much time as you need to talking about these guys. So I do want to take some time to focus on this. But let's talk about that future here for Boise State, looking at those new recruits. I'm not going to go through and list everyone. We've talked about some already, but you said like off the bat there, CJ Tiller, John Ray Dubar, Greer coming in, wide receiver, and Penry are exciting potential candidates as well. You built some wealth on offensive line and in the tight end room. Who is kind of your favorite offensive recruit from this early signing day class? Actually, when I wrote this video, I said early signing day class. We've also brought in some guys since since then. So just kind of the guys that Boise State has brought in so far, who is kind of a favorite for this class that you like to look at as strong potential? And then who is somebody or who are some people that you think might have a potential to contribute right away or potentially fight for not necessarily a starting role, but at least some playing time?
Well, I'm going to give you two answers here. So first of all, my favorite recruit in this entire class is a defender, linebacker Wyatt Milkovich. He's just an old school thumper. He just reminds me of an old school quarterback. I can see him breaking out the old neck roll and just going out there and just crushing somebody. Love that kid. He's going to be really good out of Basha High School in Arizona. Really talented player. He's going to be good. But offensively, we've already talked about him. Breezy Dubar. He's a guy who, even though this backfield is stacked, he's going to demand some sort of touches. This kid's a special athlete. Much like Ashton Jeanty, he's chiseled. He weighs more than he looks. He's not quite as big as Jeanty is, but he's hella explosive. As a senior at Anna High School in Texas, he put up more than 1,600 rushing yards, put up more than 1,100 yards last year. And this is at Anna High in Texas, a high-level school in Texas where football is big business. So he knows how to compete. He knows how to work. He's going to come in and compete right away. And then C.J. Tiller, he's got a chance to come in and be QB2 in year one. You look at who Boise State has on the roster behind Taylor Green right now, and there's no experience at all. Now, I think they are going to add a transfer quarterback by signing day. I'd be shocked if they don't. But I think Taylor comes in, he competes right away to be number two. He's a kid that's really got a good head on his shoulder. He's already shown a lot of leadership potential. He's already rallying the kids in his program. He's a really productive guy, good size, big arm. So I think he's going to be a good complement to Taylor Green. And they have added some recruits here in the last few days. Wide receiver Chase Penry from Colorado, in the last few weeks. Chase Penry from Colorado, he has a chance to come in and play right away as a slot guy. And then on defense, Titus Toller, the safety from Wisconsin, two edge rushers, the edge rusher from Boston College, the edge rusher from Utah. Those kids are going to come in and play right away because that is an area of absolute need. We don't know if Demetri Washington's coming back. So those edge rushers are going to play day one. But offensively, John Brace Dubar, C.J. Tiller, remember those names.
Well, I'm excited for the future here for Boise State. I think they're coming into this season with a lot of experience and talent on this roster already. Then they hit the offensive coordinator position hard. I mean, they brought in an absolute great here for Boise State. Obviously, a former quarterback for Boise State as well. So he has connections to the program. He knows what this culture is about and what Boise State fans expect and how to get us back to some of those glory days for Boise State. So obviously you've got a great wealth of talent on the roster already. You bring in a great offensive coordinator. And then I think you're right. I think that the recruiting has, especially when you consider the fact that you didn't have your long-term next year offensive coordinator on the roster at the same time. So you probably had to see, maybe I would assume Andy Avalo has probably stepped up a little bit more in the recruiting game, picking up some of that slack there because, Cutter was honest. He said, I'm not out recruiting on the weekends. I'm playing golf. I'm here to put this team together and keep them through the season, but I'm retired. I'm moving on. So to bring in a great offensive coordinator like this, to bring in some of the recruits that Boise State still managed to bring in and land, it speaks levels of where this program is going. The investments, not just financially, like you talked about with the great stuff that we're bringing in for the athletic department, but also from the fan base. There's a different energy around Boise State right now that I haven't seen in a long time. A lot of excitement for the future of this program. So I love this look back at 2022. The next time that I talk offense, it will be talking about this 2023 season. I'm excited. This is going to be a great year. Make sure you like, subscribe, because I'm going to be talking about the defense with BJ Rains. I'm bringing in special teams perspective with former Boise State kicker Tyler Rausa. So make sure you like, subscribe so you don't miss out on either of those great videos. I think this has been a great discussion. Thanks so much as always, Ron, for coming on. It's been great having you. Make sure I'll throw again the link in the description to his Twitter profile. Make sure you go follow that. And then he is very active on multiple Boise State or Mountain West related Facebook groups, Bronco Nation updates, Mountain West Conference Alliance, posting his articles on there. So you can find his work pretty much anywhere where Boise State or Mountain West content is to be found. So make sure that you read his stuff. Make sure you follow him there on Twitter and just give him all the support he deserves because he does a great job covering Boise State sports. So thanks so much for being on, Ron. Thanks so much, everybody, for watching. Make sure you like, subscribe. And as always, go Big Blue.